Millionaire witnesses, elderly woman. Asking for milk on credit. What he does leaves everyone in tears. She barely had coins in her pocket, but carried in her eyes the pain of a forgotten life. Seeing her being ignored, he decides to act, not knowing that this gesture would change everything. What begins with a glass of milk ends in a revolution of love that no one expected. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The cold May wind cut through the streets of Chicago like a sharp blade. Dry leaves danced across the wet asphalt, creating a melancholic symphony that echoed between the grey buildings. It was one of those mornings when the sky seemed to carry the weight of all the world's sorrows, and people walked hurriedly, hunched in their coats, avoiding looking into each other's eyes. Eleanor walked slowly down Palm Street, each step a struggle against time and indifference. At 73, she carried on her back not only the weight of years, but the invisible burden of someone forgotten by the world. Her navy blue wool coat, which had once been elegant, now showed patches made by her own trembling hands. Her synthetic leather shoes let the icy water penetrate to the bone, but she continued forward, as she had always done. In her worn purse, she carefully kept the few coins she had managed to save by selling homemade sweets in the park. It was all she had, besides the embroidered handkerchief her mother had given her decades ago. That piece of cloth, yellowed by time, was her only connection to the days when she felt loved and protected. Mr. Joseph's grocery store was on the corner, a small, cramped establishment that had served the neighborhood for more than 20 years. Eleanor pushed the glass door, making the little bell announce her arrival with a weak, melancholic tinkle. The warmth of the environment brought momentary relief, but soon she realized that her presence went unnoticed. 3 customers were animatedly discussing football with the owner, while a young woman was on her cell phone near the cleaning product shelves. Eleanor waited patiently, as she always did, until someone noticed her. When she finally managed to get the shopkeeper's attention, her voice came out weak and hesitant. "Good morning, Mr. Joseph. Could you give me a quart of milk, please?" The middle-aged man with his stained apron and disheveled grey hair looked at her with an expression that mixed haste and impatience. "Of course, Eleanor. That's $3.50. Eleanor opened her purse with trembling fingers and counted the coins on the counter. 2 $1 coins, some 50-cent coins, and several smaller ones. The amount didn't add up. She was 80 cents short. She counted again, hoping the numbers would change by miracle, but the cruel mathematics remained unchanged. "Mr. Joseph," she murmured, feeling the heat rise to her wrinkled face. "I don't have all the money right now, but I promise I'll bring it tomorrow. The lady on the corner said she's going to buy more sweets on Monday." The silence that settled in the small grocery store was heavier than the humid morning air. The other customers stopped talking and looked toward the counter. Eleanor felt the weight of all those gazes, the shame burning in her cheeks like a fever. Mr. Joseph sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Eleanor, you know I have bills to pay too. I can't keep giving credit to everyone." The words echoed in the small environment like stones thrown into a calm lake. Eleanor lowered her eyes, putting the coins back in her purse. She was used to rejection, but that didn't make each no she heard any less painful. It was then that a deep, firm voice cut through the awkward silence. "I'll pay." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. At the back of the store, near the beverage refrigerator, was a man of approximately 45 years. Tall, well-dressed, with a dark suit that contrasted with the simple environment of the grocery store. His eyes, a deep brown, observed the scene with an intensity that aroused curiosity. Edward Mitchell didn't usually frequent neighborhood grocery stores. As the executive director of one of Chicago's largest logistics companies, his life revolved around luxurious offices, sophisticated restaurants, and business meetings. He was there only because his driver had stopped to refuel at the gas station next door, and he had decided to buy a bottle of water. But something about that elderly woman touched him in an inexplicable way. Perhaps it was the dignity with which she faced humiliation, or the way she tried to keep her head high even in the face of rejection. Edward approached the counter, taking a $50 bill from his wallet. "You can give the change to the lady," he said, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes. She raised her face, surprised. For a moment their eyes met, and Edward saw in them a depth of experience and suffering that made him swallow hard. She wasn't just an elderly woman in financial difficulty. She was a whole person, with a complex story written in every wrinkle of her face. "Thank you very much, sir," murmured Eleanor, her voice choked. "God will reward you." Edward nodded, not knowing quite what to say. He took his water and headed for the exit, but something made him stop at the door. He turned and saw Eleanor carefully storing the milk in her purse, along with the change Mr. Joseph had given her. Her movements were careful, reverent almost, as if that quart of milk were a precious treasure. "Ma'am," called Edward, making Eleanor look in his direction. "Where are you going? Can I give you a ride?" Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially well-dressed men who clearly belonged to a world very different from hers. But there was something in that man's eyes that reassured her, a sincerity she hadn't seen in a long time. "I live nearby, sir. I don't want to bother you." "It's no bother at all," replied Edward, holding the door open for her. "With this weather, no one should be walking on the street." They left the grocery store together. Edward's driver, a middle-aged man named Carlos, opened the rear door of the black Mercedes without asking questions. Eleanor entered the car carefully, as if afraid of dirtying the leather seats. During the short journey to her house, Edward tried to start a conversation. He discovered that Eleanor lived alone in a small rented house, that she was 73 years old, and that she supported herself by selling homemade sweets. She spoke little, always polite, but there was a sadness in her voice that Edward couldn't ignore. When they arrived at the indicated address, Edward looked out the car window. The house was small and simple, with paint peeling on the walls and a small garden where some flowers tried to survive neglect. Even so, there was something welcoming about that place, a sense that someone who knew the value of simple things lived there. "Thank you very much for the ride and the kindness," said Eleanor, already on the sidewalk. "God bless you." Edward watched her enter the house, noting how she walked slowly, as if each step were calculated to save energy. Something inside him moved, a strange sensation he couldn't name. It was more than pity or compassion. It was a recognition, as if he had seen something of himself in that solitary woman. As the car pulled away, Edward couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. There was something in her story that resonated with his own experience. He too knew loneliness, even surrounded by people all the time. He also knew what it was to be ignored, albeit for completely different reasons. That night, in his luxurious apartment on the south side, Edward dined alone as he always did. The large mahogany table could seat 12 people, but he ate in silence, accompanied only by the distant sound of traffic below. He thought of Eleanor, imagining her in her small house, perhaps warming the milk he had helped her buy. Why had that encounter affected him so much? Edward tried to focus on the reports he needed to review, but his mind always returned to that grey morning at the grocery store. There was something about that woman that intrigued him, a silent strength that contrasted with her apparent fragility. Without really realizing how, Edward made a decision that would change his life forever. The next day, he would return to the grocery store. He wanted to know more about Eleanor, about her story, about what had led her to that situation. He couldn't explain why, but he felt that that encounter hadn't been casual. It was as if fate had conspired to put two lonely souls in the same place, at the right time, creating a bridge between two worlds that seemed incapable of communicating. The next morning brought a timid sun that struggled to pierce the thick clouds. Edward woke up earlier than usual, a strange restlessness taking over his thoughts. During breakfast, served by the housekeeper in his silent penthouse, he couldn't concentrate on the financial newspaper he religiously read every morning. At 10 o'clock, he asked Carlos to take him back to the neighborhood where he had met Eleanor. He invented an excuse about needing to check a property in the area, but the truth was that he couldn't get that woman out of his head. There was something in her silent dignity that disturbed and fascinated him at the same time. When he arrived at Palm Street, Edward walked slowly to Eleanor's house. It was even smaller than he remembered, with small windows protected by old bars and a wooden door that had seen better days. He hesitated before knocking. What would he say? How would he explain his presence there? Before he could decide, the door opened. Eleanor appeared with a flowery apron tied around her waist, her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her expression of surprise quickly transformed into a shy smile. "Mr. Edward, what a surprise to see you here." He was touched by the fact that she had remembered his name. "Good morning, Eleanor. I was passing through the area and thought I'd visit you. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Bothering? Not at all. Please come in. I've just made some coffee." The interior of the house was a lesson in organized simplicity. Every object had its place. Every piece of furniture was impeccably clean. The walls were decorated with old photos in simple frames and some embroidery that Eleanor had probably made with her own hands. There was a pleasant smell of cake in the air, mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Please sit down," said Eleanor, indicating a wooden chair at the small kitchen table. "I'll get the coffee." Edward looked around as she moved with careful gestures. It was impressive how she managed to transform so little into something so welcoming. His homes, he had 3 properties, were decorated by professionals, full of expensive objects, but none conveyed the feeling of home he felt at that moment. "Do you live alone?" asked Eleanor, placing 2 simple porcelain cups on the table. The coffee was strong and fragrant, accompanied by slices of a cake that looked like it had come out of a cooking magazine. "Yes, I've lived alone for many years," replied Edward, tasting the cake. The flavor immediately transported him to childhood, to the kitchen of the house where he had grown up before everything changed. "This cake is delicious. Did you make it?" Eleanor smiled, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "It's my mother's recipe. She always said that food made with love feeds more than just the stomach." "Your mother was a wise woman," commented Edward. "Do you have family?" Eleanor's smile faded slightly. She stirred the coffee with slow movements, as if gaining time to decide what to reveal. "I have a daughter," she finally said, her voice lower, "but it's been years since we've spoken." Edward perceived the pain behind those simple words. There was a story there, layers of hurt that she carried in silence. "Forgive me if I'm being indiscreet. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "No, it's all right," sighed Eleanor. "Sometimes it's good to talk. Margaret is my only daughter. I raised her alone after my husband left us when she was only 5 years old. I worked as a domestic worker, a seamstress, a caregiver. I did everything to give her a better life." Edward listened in silence, noticing how Eleanor's voice gained strength as she spoke. It was as if unburdening brought some relief to a pain kept for a long time. "Margaret was always intelligent, studious. She got a scholarship to study law, graduated with honors. I was so proud," continued Eleanor, her eyes shining with the memory. "She got a job at an important firm, met a young man from a traditional family." The pause that followed was loaded with meaning. Edward waited, respecting her rhythm. "When she decided to get married, she said I couldn't go to the ceremony, that my presence would be inappropriate, that her new friends and her husband's family wouldn't understand where she came from." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly. "She changed her last name, changed her address without telling me. It was as if I had ceased to exist." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. Eleanor's story echoed painfully with his own experience. He too knew rejection, albeit for different reasons. His father, a successful businessman, had always shown disappointment with the son he considered too weak for business. When Edward was a child and showed sensitivity or compassion, he heard lectures about how feelings don't pay bills, and how he needed to harden his heart to succeed in life. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," said Edward, his voice loaded with sincerity. "No mother should go through that." "Sometimes I wonder where I went wrong," murmured Eleanor, discreetly wiping away a tear that insisted on appearing. "Maybe I should have prepared her better for the world out there. Maybe if I had studied more, gotten a better job." "You didn't do anything wrong," interrupted Edward firmly. "A person who abandons someone who raised them with love and sacrifice is making a mistake with themselves, not with you." Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. It had been so long since someone had validated her feelings, had made her feel that her pain was legitimate. "You are very kind. Your mother must be very proud of the son she raised." Edward was silent for a moment. "My mother passed away when I was 8, he finally said. "Cancer. My father raised me alone, but he wasn't very affectionate. He said that displays of affection were signs of weakness." "Oh my God," sighed Eleanor. "How sad for a child to grow up without affection." "I managed to succeed in business, as he wanted," continued Edward, his voice loaded with an old bitterness. "But sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. I have money, a prosperous company, but—" He stopped, surprised by his own frankness. He wasn't used to opening up like this to anyone. "But you feel alone," completed Eleanor gently. Edward nodded, unable to speak. It was the first time in years that someone understood his feelings without him needing to explain. Eleanor got up and served more coffee for both, her delicate movements loaded with maternal care. "You know, Mr. Edward," she said, sitting back down, I think we both understand what it is to carry the pain of abandonment. The difference is that you were abandoned by someone who should have given you unconditional love, and I was abandoned by someone who should have been grateful for the love she received. Eleanor's observation was like a ray of light illuminating dark corners that Edward preferred to keep closed. For the first time, he was able to see his story from a new perspective. It wasn't just him who was alone in the world. There were other people carrying similar pains, struggling to find meaning amid loneliness. "Eleanor," said Edward after a long silence, "I'd like to make you a proposal. How about if you came to have dinner at my house tonight? I promise the food won't be as good as yours, but I have an excellent cook." Eleanor hesitated, clearly surprised by the invitation. "Mr. Edward, I don't want to be a bother. People like you must have important commitments." "I have nothing more important than a good conversation with a person who understands the value of company," replied Edward with sincerity. "Please, accept. It would be an honor to host you." The smile that lit up Eleanor's face was like the sun rising after a long, dark night. "In that case, I accept with pleasure. It's been so long since I've had dinner at someone's house." Edward felt genuine joy, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. As he said goodbye to Eleanor and returned to the car, he realized that something fundamental had changed within him. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel completely alone in the world. He had found someone who understood his pain, someone who, despite all difficulties, still maintained the capacity to offer kindness and compassion. Perhaps that casual encounter at the grocery store was exactly what they both needed, to begin healing old wounds and finding a new meaning for their lives. Edward's penthouse in the elegant Lakeview neighborhood had never received a visit like Eleanor. When she arrived at 7 in the evening, wearing a simple but impeccably ironed navy blue dress, Edward realized how her presence instantly transformed the cold and impersonal environment of his home. "What a beautiful place," murmured Eleanor, admiring the panoramic view of the city through the large glass windows. "It must be wonderful to wake up every day seeing Chicago like this from above." Edward looked out the window, as if seeing it for the first time. For years, that view had been just a backdrop for his rushed mornings, something he barely noticed. But through Eleanor's eyes, he could see the beauty of the lights that were beginning to turn on, the silent dance of traffic below, the immensity of the city that sheltered them. "Actually, I've never paid much attention," confessed Edward. "I spend most of my time focused on work." "Sometimes we lose the ability to see beauty when we're too concerned with other things," observed Eleanor wisely. "My mother used to say that God puts beauty everywhere, but we need to have eyes to see it." Dinner was served on the gourmet terrace, an elegantly set table for two. Edward's cook, Mrs. Rose, a 50-year-old woman who had worked for him for a decade, had prepared a sophisticated menu. Grilled salmon with Sicilian lemon risotto and organic vegetables. As they ate, Edward observed how Eleanor appreciated each forkful with true gratitude. She praised the flavors, asked about the ingredients, showed genuine interest in the culinary art. It was so different from the business dinners he was used to, where food was just a secondary detail between discussions about contracts and strategies. "Mrs. Rose must be an excellent cook," commented Eleanor. "This salmon is perfect." "I'll tell her. Mrs. Rose is always happy when people compliment her food," replied Edward. "Actually, I think she was more excited today knowing she would have a special guest. I don't usually receive visitors at home." "Don't you have close friends?" asked Eleanor delicately. Edward thought about the question for a moment. He had hundreds of professional contacts, knew influential people in various sectors, attended important social events. But true friends, people with whom he could share his fears, his doubts, his genuine joys. "I have many acquaintances, but few true friends," he admitted. "The business world is complicated. People usually approach out of interest, not real affinity." Eleanor nodded with understanding. "I understand. After Margaret got married and rejected me, I also closed myself off a lot. The neighbors tried to talk, but I felt there was a distance, as if my sadness pushed people away." "And how did you deal with that?" "I learned to find company in small pleasures," said Eleanor, a melancholy smile playing on her lips. "In the flowers in my garden, in the birds that come to drink water from the bowl I leave on the window, in the radio programs I listen to while cooking. Loneliness can be cruel, but it can also teach us to value our own company." Edward was impressed by that woman's wisdom. Despite all the difficulties she had faced, Eleanor had found ways to cultivate inner peace and gratitude. He, even with all the financial resources available, constantly struggled against a feeling of emptiness that money had never been able to fill. "Eleanor," said Edward after a moment of silence, "can I ask you a perhaps indiscreet question?" "Of course, Mr. Edward. Have you never thought about trying to reconnect with your daughter? Maybe she's changed her mind over time." Eleanor's face contracted slightly, a shadow of pain passing through her eyes. "I think about it every day. I even wrote several letters, but I never had the courage to send them. What if she doesn't want to receive me? What if it only brings more suffering to both of us? But what if she's sorry too? What if she's waiting for a sign from you?" Eleanor was silent, distractedly stirring the rest of the risotto on her plate. "Sometimes I have dreams about her. I dream that she comes back, that she asks for forgiveness, that she introduces me to my grandchildren. I always wake up crying." "Do you have grandchildren?" "I don't know," sighed Eleanor. "I've heard vague comments from neighbors who've seen her at the mall, but I've never had confirmation. It's one of the pains I carry, the possibility of having grandchildren who don't know me." Edward felt his heart tighten. Eleanor's situation was even more complex and painful than he had imagined. He decided to change the subject, not wanting to prolong her suffering. "Tell me about your sweets," he asked. "How did you start making them to sell?" Eleanor's face immediately lit up. "Ah, that's a happier story. After I retired as a domestic worker, with the small pension I receive, I needed extra income. I remembered my mother's recipes and started making brigadeiros, beijinhos, cocadas. At first I only sold to the neighbors, but word spread." "And what's people's reaction when they taste your sweets?" "They always say they taste like childhood," replied Eleanor with pride. "I think it's because I make them with care, you know. Each brigadeiro I roll, I think of who will eat it. I hope it brings a moment of joy to that person." Edward was moved by the answer. While he spent days focused on spreadsheets, reports, and growth strategies, Eleanor dedicated her time to creating small moments of happiness for strangers. There was something deeply touching in that perspective on life. "Eleanor," said Edward, an idea beginning to form in his mind, "would you like to see my company? I think it would be interesting for you to see where I work." "Your company?" "But Mr. Edward, I don't want to disrupt your work. On the contrary, I think your presence could be very positive there. My employees work hard, but sometimes I feel we lose the human side of what we do. Perhaps you could remind us of the importance of keeping our hearts in what we do." Eleanor seemed surprised by the proposal. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that. I don't understand anything about business." "Exactly why. You understand people, kindness, care. They're things we sometimes forget in the corporate world." They talked until late, sharing stories, memories, and perspectives on life. Edward discovered that Eleanor had an impressive knowledge about various subjects, the fruit of decades of reading and attentive observation of the world around her. She, in turn, was fascinated by Edward's stories about the business world, asking insightful questions that surprised him. When Eleanor finally prepared to leave, Edward insisted on taking her home. During the journey, both remained silent, but it was a comfortable silence loaded with mutual understanding. "Thank you for this wonderful evening," said Eleanor as she said goodbye. "It had been years since I felt so seen, so heard." "I'm the one who should thank you, Eleanor. You reminded me of things I had forgotten about what really matters in life." As the car pulled away, Edward looked in the rearview mirror and saw Eleanor at the door of her house waving delicately. For the first time in many years, he felt he had spent a truly meaningful evening. He hadn't discussed business, hadn't closed contracts, hadn't expanded his network of professional contacts, but he had connected with another human being in a genuine way, and that was worth more than any commercial transaction. That night, as he prepared to sleep in his luxurious suite, Edward made a decision. The next day, he would take Eleanor to see his company. He wanted to show her his world, but more than that, he wanted his employees to meet that extraordinary woman who was teaching him, with her simple presence, the true meaning of human wealth. The headquarters of Mitchell Logistics occupied 3 floors of a modern building in the downtown financial district. Edward arrived the next morning with renewed energy, Eleanor at his side in the back seat of the Mercedes. She observed everything with genuine curiosity, the mirrored buildings, the intense movement of executives, the pulsating modernity of Chicago's financial center. "It's impressive how everything moves so quickly here," commented Eleanor as they entered the marble and glass lobby. "Sometimes too quickly," replied Edward, realizing for the first time how intimidating that environment could be. "But today I want to show you that behind all this rush, there are people with stories, dreams, and concerns like anyone else." When they reached the 10th floor where Edward's office was located, employees looked with curiosity at the elegant elderly woman accompanying the boss. Edward gathered his main team in the conference room and introduced Eleanor as a very special friend who would like to better understand our work. "Eleanor has a unique perspective on human relationships," explained Edward. "I thought it would be enriching for all of us to hear her." Initially, there was a palpable awkwardness. The executives, accustomed to technical presentations and discussions about goals, didn't know how to react to the presence of that simple-looking lady who smiled gently at everyone. But Eleanor, with her characteristic naturalness, soon broke the ice. "What interesting work you all do," she said, addressing the group. "Connecting people, taking products where they're needed. It's like being a bridge between different worlds." Martha, the human resources director, a 40-year-old woman who was always serious and focused on results, was the first to open up. "Actually, Eleanor, sometimes we lose sight of that perspective. We see only numbers, deadlines, efficiency. But the numbers represent people, don't they?" observed Eleanor. "Each delivery you make could mean a medicine arriving on time for someone, a birthday present for a child, food for a family. You're part of people's joy, even without knowing it." Eleanor's words had a visible impact in the room. Edward watched, fascinated, as she managed with simplicity and wisdom to transform experienced professionals' perspective on their own work. Robert, the financial director, a man traditionally focused only on spreadsheets and profits, made a surprising observation. "I've never thought about it that way. I always see our work only from the side of costs and revenues." "Of course costs are important," agreed Eleanor. "But when we do something with meaning, the work becomes lighter, don't you think? My mother always said that when we put love into what we do, even the most difficult tasks become bearable." The conversation extended for more than an hour. Eleanor listened with genuine attention to each employee talk about their challenges, their motivations, their concerns. She offered different perspectives, always with gentleness and wisdom, never in a condescending or superior way. Edward noticed a subtle but significant transformation in the environment. People seemed more relaxed, more open, more human. Martha talked about the difficulties of balancing career and motherhood. Robert mentioned his concern for his elderly father who lived alone. Anna, the youngest assistant, confessed her fears about her professional future. "You know," said Eleanor at the end of the meeting, "what impresses me most here isn't these modern computers or these beautiful charts. It's seeing that you form a family, a professional family, but still a family. Take care of each other." When the meeting ended, Edward accompanied Eleanor to his private office. She sat in the leather armchair in front of the mahogany desk, observing the elegant environment with curiosity. "You've built something very special here," she said. "Not just a company, but a place where people can grow and fulfill themselves." "After talking with you yesterday, I realized I was missing the essential," confessed Edward. "I was so focused on results that I forgot about the people who make those results possible." It was then that Edward's secretary, Claudia, knocked on the door with an unusual expression on her face. "Mr. Mitchell, sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman at reception asking for an Eleanor. She says she's her daughter." The silence that settled in the room was deafening. Eleanor turned pale, her hands trembling slightly. Edward felt his heart accelerate, realizing the magnitude of the moment. "Margaret," murmured Eleanor, her voice almost inaudible. "Would you like me to ask her to come up?" asked Claudia gently. Eleanor looked at Edward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't know if I'm prepared." "Eleanor," said Edward, getting up and going to her. "You've been waiting for this moment for years. You can't miss it now." With trembling hands, Eleanor arranged her hair and smoothed her dress. Edward asked Claudia to bring Margaret to his office, offering the space so that mother and daughter could talk with privacy. A few minutes later, an elegant woman of approximately 40 years entered the office. Margaret had inherited her mother's expressive eyes, but her posture was tense, loaded with years of guilt and regret. She stopped at the door upon seeing Eleanor, the two women observing each other across an abyss of time and hurt. "Mom," said Margaret, her voice choked. "My daughter," replied Eleanor, rising slowly. Edward discreetly left the room, leaving mother and daughter alone. Outside, he waited anxiously, silently praying that this reunion would bring healing to both. Through the glass door, he could see the two women talking intensely. There were tears, gestures of hurt, moments of tension. But gradually, Edward observed something beautiful happening. The postures softened, the distances diminished, and finally, after almost an hour, he saw Eleanor and Margaret embracing. When they finally left the office, both were transformed. Eleanor seemed 10 years younger, a glow of joy illuminating her face. Margaret, in turn, had lost her rigidity, appearing more human, more vulnerable. "Mr. Mitchell," said Margaret, extending her hand, "I don't know how to thank you for taking care of my mother. She told me about your kindness." "Actually," replied Edward, "it was your mother who took care of me. She taught me things about life that I had forgotten." Margaret smiled through tears. "She always had that gift. She always knew how to find the best in people." She turned to Eleanor. "Mom, I want you to meet your grandchildren. Jason is 8 years old and Sophie is 5. They've always asked about Grandma, and I never knew what to answer." Eleanor brought her hands to her heart, too emotional to speak. Edward felt his own eyes filling with tears as he witnessed that scene of reconciliation. "There's something I need to tell you," said Margaret, looking at Edward and then at Eleanor. "I didn't come here by chance today. For months I've been trying to find the courage to look for my mother. I hired a private detective to locate her, and he told me she was being frequently seen with a businessman from the area. When I discovered it was you, Mr. Mitchell, I decided to come to your company." "The important thing is that you came," said Eleanor, holding her daughter's hands. "The past is in the past. What matters is the future we can build together." 3 months later, everyone's life had changed dramatically. Eleanor had moved to an apartment near Margaret's house, where she could see her grandchildren every day. Mitchell Logistics had implemented an employee wellness program inspired by conversations with Eleanor, which resulted not only in greater productivity, but in a more human and welcoming work environment. Edward, in turn, discovered that true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in the genuine relationships he had cultivated. Eleanor had become like a mother to him, offering the maternal affection he had never had. And Margaret, grateful for the transformation that Edward had provided in her mother's life, had become a dear friend. At Eleanor's birthday party, celebrated in Edward's apartment with the presence of Margaret, the grandchildren, and several company employees who had become fond of the elderly woman, Edward made a special toast. "A few months ago, I was a man rich only in material goods," he said, raising his glass. "Today I am truly rich, because I learned that the greatest wealth is in the people we love and who love us back. Eleanor, thank you for teaching me that a simple gesture of kindness can transform not just one life, but all the lives around it." Eleanor, surrounded by her reunited family and genuine friends, smiled with eyes shining with happiness. "Sometimes," she said, "God puts us in the most unexpected places to find exactly what our soul needs. I needed to feel loved again, and you gave that back to me. But more than that, you gave me back hope." Jason and Sophie, Eleanor's grandchildren, ran to hug her, shouting "Grandma" with contagious joy. Margaret observed the scene with tears of gratitude, finally at peace with her choices and with the future that was unfolding ahead. Edward looked around the room full of laughter, animated conversations, and genuine love, and realized that that cold morning at the grocery store had been the beginning of a new life for all of them. Sometimes, he thought, angels appear disguised as simple people who need our help, but who actually come to save us. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor and Edward has touched you deeply. This narrative reminds us that the most transformative encounters happen when we least expect them, and that true wealth lies in the ability to see and welcome others. As Edward discovered, a simple gesture of kindness can trigger a revolution of love that transforms not only our lives, but the world around us. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Share in the comments how this story made you reflect on the importance of compassion in your own lives. Don't miss our upcoming content, where we'll continue exploring the infinite possibilities of the human heart. Until the next story that will warm your hearts and renew your faith in the goodness of people,